Many people, myself included, were really hoping that we would get new MacBooks at WWDC. Especially me, because of a promise that I now have to fulfill and am deeply regretting making. But now it's looking like there's gonna be several more months until we get new generation MacBook Pros. So until then, I figured it would be worth revisiting the 16-inch MacBook Pro in 2021. Is it still good? Whether you're considering a 16-inch MacBook Pro or you've already jumped on the Apple Silicon bandwagon, today's video sponsor SetApp can improve your workflow and streamline productivity. SetApp rethinks the way we use software by giving you instant access to a curated collection of over 200 productivity apps all at once. When you need to do something, SetApp can help you find the right tool right away. Security, remote work, productivity, you name it, SetApp has got you covered. SetApp refocuses the way you think about computing to tasks that can be solved instead of apps that have to be downloaded. You don't need to spend ages searching forum posts and review sites to find the best app and manage a ton of paid subscriptions, some of which, let's be honest, you probably don't even use anymore. You can try SetApp right now for 7 days free, and after that a subscription is just $9.99 a month to gain access to their powerful tools and over 200 apps. To achieve more with your Mac, check the link in the description below and try SetApp today. And remember, think tasks, not apps. Now, back to the video. Okay, so to start, we need to address the elephant in the room. The 16-inch MacBook Pro is still technically the current model. You can still buy this brand new for as much as $6,700 in a fully loaded configuration. That's a mind-numbing amount of money to be spending on a product that Apple is, by their own definition, transitioning away from. So the question is it worth it? No. Well, what am I gonna do for the rest of the video? I guess I'm just gonna have to ask you to subscribe for the next 15 minutes. But seriously, you should not be spending any amount of money on a new 16-inch MacBook Pro right now. However, as we often do on this channel, we're gonna dig a little bit deeper and examine used 16-inch MacBook Pros, because there are other ways to buy Macs than directly from Apple, as any longtime viewer or future longtime viewer, if you hit subscribe right now, would tell you. It's been more than a year and a half since the 16-inch was released in November 2019, and there are now quite a number of deals to be had. Base models with the 6-core i7 can be had for $1,600 all day long, or even as low as $1,300. That's the exact same price as the starting M1 MacBook Pro. Higher-end Core i9 models with the 1TB SSD can be had for under $2,000 and even as low as $1,700. These one-year-old MacBooks are knocking up to $1,000 off the prices for buying the exact same model new right now, all during a time where computers have never been more expensive due to shortages. And you bet your bottom dollar that's because of Apple Silicon. Now, as we start this discussion and figure out whether or not a 16-inch MacBook Pro is worth it, we have to start with the one line that I know I'm gonna hear a million times in the comments.
But Luke, the M1 MacBook Pro is already faster than the 16-inch anyway.
No, that's just not correct. At best, it's wildly misleading. Sure, you can pick a few benchmarks where the M1 will beat the Intel processor, but if you want to actually look at the full picture, it's a lot more nuanced. If we start by looking at Cinebench R23, you can see that the M1 does in fact beat the Core i7 entry-level 16-inch MacBook Pro, but my unit with the 2.3 GHz Core i9 is definitely the best performer here, albeit not by a huge margin. This is the entire reason why we're looking at used listings, because when you look at that performance difference and you realize that the new price of this computer is more than double the M1 MacBook Pro, it's terrible, not good at all. But at $1,700, which is only about $400 more than the M1 MacBook Pro, maybe it's not so bad. One thing you simply cannot ignore is the graphics. The Radeon Pro 5500M in my 16-inch is undeniably and vastly superior to the M1. Running the Tomb Raider benchmark on both devices reveals that while the M1 is only able to muster 25 FPS, the 5500M can squeeze 57 FPS on the same settings. Granted, the M1 is being held back by running Tomb Raider through Rosetta, but even without that translation layer, this is just objectively a more powerful GPU. There's no getting around that. Moving on to Blender, things get interesting because there's a new Apple Silicon optimized version which performs better than what it was running under Rosetta. The BMW render used to take about 5 minutes 45 seconds, but now it's down to 5:19 compared to the Intel's 4 minutes and 5 seconds. On the other hand, in Final Cut Pro, Apple's optimization really shines. It takes Apple Silicon just 8 minutes and 57 seconds to render a 10-minute 10-bit 4K 60 clip, whereas the Intel machine is 12 minutes and 18 seconds. This is an astonishing result when you look at the fact that the Core i9 is more powerful than the M1 MacBook Pro in most multi-core cases, and the 5500M is definitely more powerful than the M1's GPU, yet in Final Cut Pro, the M1 wins by a landslide. That is optimization for you. In these tests, you can see a tit for tat. Each computer wins in some areas, but neither of them is a clear overall victor in terms of winning performance benchmarks alone. And obviously this is a limited sample of benchmarks, so you can look at a broader range and see how it would perform for you to best determine which is more powerful. But the point is to just look at the tests where the M1 wins and say, oh, look at that, it's faster, is foolish. It's like saying my car is faster than yours when you're doing the race with a cow in the trunk. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. We also have to look outside just comparing performance figures. The 16-inch MacBook Pro with the i9, 16 gigs of RAM, and 1TB SSD is actually very price competitive for its specs. You can't just look at the performance benchmarks, say this isn't $400 faster, and completely ignore the fact that it has 4 times the storage and twice the RAM. If you want the M1 MacBook Pro with 16 gigs and a terabyte, it's going to cost you $1,900, which is almost exactly the same as the average going price for a 16-inch MacBook Pro with the higher tier configuration. You also can't ignore that the 16-inch has better sounding, louder speakers. It has a larger display with thinner bezels. And crucially, it has twice as many Thunderbolt ports. When I reviewed the base model iMac, I said that its 2 Thunderbolt ports were its biggest limitation, and that obviously still applies to the MacBook Pro. Just having these extra 2 ports on the other side makes a huge difference, even for simple things like being able to charge it from both sides. We also can't overlook Bootcamp. I know many people won't find it useful, and AMD barely updates their drivers for the graphics, so it's not really that well optimized, but when I was out of town a few weeks ago and wanted to be able to play some games, being able to fire up Bootcamp was really handy. So far, things are looking pretty decent for the 16-inch MacBook Pro. I mean, at $1,700 to $1,900, you're getting a terabyte of storage, a Core i9, 16 gigs of RAM, great display, great speakers, great keyboard, great trackpad, great form factor. It still looks very great. That's a lot of greats. But unfortunately, now's the part of the video where my tone shifts and I adopt a more negative view of this MacBook Pro. After spending so much of the last few months on Apple Silicon Macs, going back to Intel has reminded me of one thing that I really had forgotten all about. Fans. I mean, what the heck is going on in here? It's so loud all the time for no reason. Everything you do is fans. Computer on the lap? Fans. Computer on the desk? Fans. 2 Safari tabs? Fans. Warmer than 75 degrees in the room? Fans. It's constantly warm, even if it's not doing anything. Right now, I've been sitting here for 17 minutes. It's just been sitting on the desktop, and it's warm to the touch. Like, I don't get it. The thing basically oscillates between scalding hot frying pan and jet engine, while not ever being cool to the touch. The heat and fan noise that we've all lived with for so long on Apple laptops is no longer acceptable now that Apple Silicon has shown us, and PC laptop makers frankly, what laptop operation should be like. If you've owned Intel MacBooks for a long time, there's a good chance that you've gotten numb to the heat and the sound. But when you switch to Apple Silicon, just for a day, and you see what the difference is, there's no going back. The same applies for battery life. After months on the M1 MacBook Pro, I felt like I needed to check for a leak or something. All the juice was draining in like 10 minutes. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but clearly a 45-watt CPU plus a 35-watt GPU plus the fact that everything is sort of spread around the board, whereas the M1 is in a really efficient SoC package, means the battery life is half of what I get out of the M1 MacBook Pro, even though the battery inside this thing is gigundo. The thing is huge, but it's just, there's only so much you can do when you're dealing with this kind of power consumption. Also, I gotta say it, I don't like the T2 chip. I know this is an opinion that many people will probably share, but even though it's kind of a minor thing, you probably won't notice it. When you do notice it, it really bugs you. For example, Touch ID takes way longer on this. Waking from sleep takes a lot longer. That's more of an Intel thing, but the T2 chip doesn't help. And there's oftentimes bugs and crashes that are associated with it that have been toned down over the years, but it's just not worth the trouble, to be honest. And Apple Silicon, you don't have to worry about it at all. But despite all of this, in my opinion, the biggest flaw with the 16-inch MacBook Pro is not the comparison to what we already have, but the looming idea of what's to come. I feel like even if I got a good deal on one that's totally loaded out for like $1,500, I'd feel like such a chump in October when the M1X MacBooks come out. Sure, there are some cases where Intel may be the only option. If that's you, then yeah, honestly, the 16-inch isn't really that bad from a value perspective. But if you're trying to maximize your performance and your dollar, I just don't know if it's good enough. With everything that we've been hearing about these new MacBook Pros, it seems like maybe not the best idea to tie yourself to this horse right before we find out what the new one's gonna be like. Now granted, you could absolutely make the case that even when the new Apple Silicon 16-inch comes out, these are still cheaper used, right? These are, $1,300 to $1,700. You can find a whole bunch of them for that price. But the thing is, it's right in the price point for the 14-inch MacBook Pro, which is almost certainly going to annihilate it in terms of performance, battery life, and features. So it's still a really tough recommendation to make, not to mention the fact that when those computers actually arrive, it's almost guaranteed that the 16-inch is going to see another price decrease as people sell off and upgrade. So is the 16-inch MacBook Pro still good in 2021? Well, it depends. I think this is a great computer, and many Intel Macs are, but the biggest factor is their price. As I said, at $2,799, which is what this would cost new, it's a terrible computer. At $1,700, it's maybe an okay computer. At $1,300, I would say, yeah, pretty darn good. So really what it depends on is how much you're spending and what specs you're getting. But I still think it's best to just wait a little bit and see what the next ones look like. So that's gonna do it for today's video. Let me know in the comments below if you think a 16-inch MacBook Pro is actually worth buying, and if so, why? And with that, I will see you guys in the next video.